Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to help you get straight to the core of complex topics. Today, we're looking at something you probably use every single day, maybe without a second thought, your web browser, that simple window to the internet. Well, things have changed. It's rapidly becoming a key battleground in cybersecurity, a war zone almost. So our deep dive today is exploring how the browser got here, how it became this main cyber battleground. We're drawing from a piece in the Hacker News dated July 29, 2025, titled How the Browser Became the Main Cyber Battleground. And our mission for you listening is to really unpack this shift, understand why digital identities are the big target now, and maybe surprisingly, how the browser itself could be part of the answer, the defense. This is for you if you want that quick, solid understanding of where cyber threats are heading without getting bogged down in, all the jargon. Okay, let's dig in. See why the browser is so critical now? We probably need to look back a bit, right? For years, the cyber attacks were, well, kind of predictable. They followed a certain playbook. Think about those big breaches from a few years back. The ones that really shook things up, the typical approach then. It often started with compromising an endpoint, a laptop, maybe a server, usually through a software bug or maybe tricking someone into clicking something malicious, running some malware, social engineering or an exploit. Then once they were inside the network, they'd look around, try to move laterally, find ways to get more access, compromise those privileged accounts, and they'd keep doing that until they could achieve their goal, stealing data, launching ransomware, sometimes both.
Right. And what's really fascinating, I think, is how fundamentally attacks had to change simply because networks themselves changed so drastically. We've seen this huge shift towards what people call SaaS-ification.
SaaS-ification. So software as a service, like Office 365, Salesforce, Google Workspace.
Exactly. Those core business systems, they're not sitting on servers down the hall anymore. They're client services you log into over the internet, and you access them. How?
Through your web browser. Almost always.
Precisely. So, naturally, the attackers followed. They shifted focus from hitting local networks to targeting these SaaS services, and these are accessed right through the employee's browser. Plus, with SaaS, you have that shared responsibility model. The cloud provider handles the infrastructure security, mostly, the business's main job often, managing who gets access, managing identities.
Oh, okay. And that's become the weak spot, the soft underbelly, as our source puts it.
That's exactly it. Identity management has become the primary target because that's the key control point the business manages for SaaS.
So attackers are chasing identities. And the browser. This is where it gets interesting, right? Our source calls it the new battleground, even a security blind spot. Why there?
Well, it's pretty simple when you think about it. The browser isn't just where you use your identity. It's kind of where it lives online. Your credentials, your login details, your active sessions, they're all managed and stored, at least temporarily, within the browser environment.
And that's what attackers want.
That's exactly what they want. Getting their hands on credentials or session tokens is incredibly powerful for them.
How so? What can they do with them?
Well, stolen credentials, usernames, and passwords can be used for targeted attacks against specific accounts. Or they can be used in massive credential stuffing campaigns, just trying those leaked pairs everywhere.
Right, hoping someone reuse a password.
Exactly. And session tokens? Those are maybe even more potent. If an attacker steals an active session token, they can often just replay it and log straight into your active session.
Bypassing login entirely.
Bypassing the login process completely. Passwords, even multi-factor authentication sometimes. Irrelevant if they have the token.
Wow. Okay. And how are they getting these? You mentioned phishing, but what else?
Oh, there are several routes. Huge dumps from past data breaches are a big source. Still finding old passwords out there. Mass credential phishing campaigns, definitely. Tricking users into giving up their details. Then there are info stealers, malware, specifically designed to scrape credentials and tokens, often right from the browser's storage.
Those stealers.
Yeah, and even malicious browser extensions. Users get tricked into installing something that looks useful, but it's stealing their info in the background. The whole cybercrime world has adapted too. You now have specialized groups who just focus on harvesting credentials and getting initial access. They then sell that access to other criminals who carry out the main attack, like ransomware deployment or data theft.
And we've seen this play out, haven't we? The source mentioned some big examples, the Snowflake campaign in 2024 and that crime wave in 2025 from Scattered Spider.
Yes, those are really stark examples of this trend. What's really telling, especially with the Snowflake attacks, is that a major source of the credentials used were from info stealer logs. some dating back as far as 2020.
2020, so old passwords.
Old breached passwords that people just hadn't changed, or accounts that weren't protected by multi-factor authentication. It highlights the persistence of the stolen data, and it also shows how even traditional endpoint malware, like InfoStealers, now has a browser focus.
How do you mean?
Well, the InfoStealer runs on the endpoint, yes, but its primary goal, harvest credentials and session tokens from the browser. Why? So the attacker can then use their own browser to log into the victim's SaaS accounts and online services. The value is in accessing those cloud platforms.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the source draws a line between attacks happening in the browser versus attacks against the browser itself. What's the key difference there?
That's a really important distinction. People are starting to say the browser is the new endpoint, and there's truth to that, but the analogy isn't perfect. Because, frankly, a web browser has a much smaller, less complex attack surface compared to something like a full Windows operating system, actually targeting the browser's code itself, finding vulnerabilities in the browser to steal identities. It happens, but it's relatively rare, few and far between, as the source says.
So most attacks aren't breaking the browser, they're using it.
Mostly, yes. One of the more common ways to attack via the browser mechanism, though, is through malicious extensions. That's where a user gets tricked into installing a bad extension, or maybe a legitimate extension they use gets compromised later on.
Right. So if direct attacks on the browser are less common, but malicious extensions are a vector, what does that mean for security teams? How should they handle browser security?
Well, the good news about extensions is that it's a problem you can largely solve, or at least manage effectively. The bottom line is users really shouldn't be installing random browser extensions from anywhere. The risk is just too high.
So lock it down.
Pretty much. Organizations should aim to allow only a small set of essential, vetted extensions. Everything else blocked by default. And then you have to monitor. Keep an eye out for signs that even one of your trusted extensions might have been compromised somehow.
That makes sense. The source had a good analogy.
Yeah, it's that allowing users to install any extension they want. It's like making every user a local admin on their machine.
You're just asking for trouble.
Exactly. You're creating unnecessary risks.
And how do organizations actually do that? Lock down extensions.
There are tools, native controls, for instance, if you're a Chrome Enterprise customer. But the process generally involves auditing what extensions people are using now, approving only the necessary ones, and then having a clear process where any new extension needs explicit approval before it can be installed.
Okay, so manage the extensions. But you said earlier, and the source emphasizes, that phishing is still the big driver, even with all this tech.
Yeah.
Why is phishing still so stubbornly effective?
It really is, isn't it? Its power lies in directly targeting what attackers need. Credentials, sessions, sometimes OAuth consent, which grants permissions or authorization codes. And phishing isn't just email anymore, right? It comes via instant messenger, social media, even malicious ads showing up in search results.
But
Ultimately, all those phishing roads lead straight to the browser. That's where the user interacts with the fake login page, enters their details, or clicks the malicious link. And what's changed significantly is the scale and sophistication. Modern phishing isn't just a basic fake email anymore.
how so?
Attackers use a whole arsenal of tricks to hide from security tools. Obfuscation techniques, ways to evade detection by email filters and network scanners. A common example is using bot protection like TAP-TCHA tests or Cloudflare turnstile.
Wait, they use CAP-TCHA. Isn't that supposed to stop bots?
It is, but attackers use it to block automated security scanning tools. If the security scanner can't solve the CAP-TCHA, it can't analyze the malicious page behind it. The source even jokes that Cloudflare Turnstile should probably come with a trigger warning for incident responders because it's used so often this way now.
That's clever. And devious.
It is. And we're seeing a new generation of phishing kits, the toolkits attackers use to build these fake pages. They're called 8M, or adversary in the middle kits. These are highly customized. They dynamically change their code to avoid signature detection. They might use custom KPTCHs, runtime anti-analysis features. It makes them incredibly hard to spot automatically.
So the tech is getting much harder to beat.
Definitely. And how they deliver the links is getting smarter too. More channels. And they often hide links within legitimate services like file sharing sites to make them look less suspicious.
And this stuff is even getting around MFA, multi-factor authentication, even passkeys, which are supposed to be unphishable.
Yeah, this is a crucial point. Attackers are adapting. As organizations get better at locking down their main login systems, their identity providers like Okta or Azure AD, their single sign-on setups. Attackers are finding ways around it. They look for weaknesses, alternative methods. The most common way they bypass MFA or even pass skis now is by tricking the system or the user into downgrading to a phishable backup authentication method.
Downgrading, like forcing it to use SMS codes instead of an authenticator app.
Exactly like that. Or maybe tricking the user through social engineering to use a recovery method that is phishable, even if their primary login method isn't. They find the weakest link in the authentication chain.
Okay, so identity is the prize. Phishing, especially these advanced forms, is the weapon. The browser is the stage.
Mm.
But why are identities themselves considered this lowest hanging fruit? What makes them so fundamentally vulnerable across organizations?
Yeah. Well, the modern attacker knows that compromising an identity is often the path of least resistance into a company's sensitive systems and data. And organizations are wrestling with just a huge, sprawling, and often quite vulnerable identity attack surface.
Can you put some numbers on that? What does it look like?
Think about it. Hundreds of different applications used across a business. Each user might have accounts in dozens of them. That adds up to potentially thousands, even tens of thousands of individual accounts across the entire app estate.
Okay, that's a lot of accounts.
It is. And within that huge number, you find all sorts of vulnerabilities. You find accounts that are vulnerable to those MFA bypass phishing kits we talked about, maybe because they use SMS or voice calls for MFA, which can be phished,
What?
or they allow that downgrade attack. You find accounts with weak passwords, reused passwords, passwords leaked in old breaches, and critically, no MFA enabled at all.
The ghost logins.
Exactly. Those forgotten accounts for old apps, maybe never properly decommissioned, still active, still vulnerable. Big target. Attackers also find ways to bypass authentication entirely, even if you have strong methods like FIDO2 keys. They abuse features like API key creation within an application or app-specific passwords, or they use OAuth consent phishing to trick users into granting excessive permissions. They can even do cross-site IP impersonation in some scenarios.
It sounds incredibly complex to manage.
It is. The source gives a striking statistic. A 1,000-user organization has over 15,000 accounts with various configurations and associated vulnerabilities.
15,000. Wow.
And a huge driver of this vulnerability is the sheer variance between applications. How you configure security for accounts can be completely different from one app to the next. Some apps integrate tightly with your central identity system, maybe using SAML for SSO, letting you enforce MFA, automatically disable unused accounts. Great. But then you have others, maybe older apps or niche SaaS tools that offer almost no central control or visibility. You don't know who has an account, if they have MFA, if they're using a breached password.
Like the snowflake situation?
That was a major factor there, yes. Lack of visibility and control over how users were authenticating directly to the service outside of the main corporate SSO. And this problem just gets worse with every new SaaS startup that pops up, often focused on growth first, security maybe second. Product-led growth exacerbates this.
So the end result is?
The end result is a landscape littered with identities that are misconfigured, often invisible to the security team, and easily exploited by readily available attacker tools. This is what fuels these breaches. The ghost logins, the 8M phishing, the downgrade attacks, the app-level configuration weaknesses. Identity becomes the easiest way in.
Okay, that paints a pretty challenging picture. It sounds a bit overwhelming, honestly. Is there a silver lining here? The source hints the browser isn't just the battleground, but maybe part of the solution, too.
Yes, precisely. And this is the really hopeful part, I think. Because these identity attacks overwhelmingly play out within the browser itself becomes the perfect vantage point for security teams. It's the ideal place to observe what's happening, to intercept malicious activity, and actually shut these attacks down.
How is it better than, say, monitoring the network or the identity provider itself?
It offers unique advantages. First, browser-level visibility isn't limited to just the apps connected to your main identity provider, like Okta or Azure AD. That might only be a fraction of all the apps your employees actually use.
It sees everything else, too, the shadow IT.
Potentially, yes. It isn't limited to only the apps the security team knows about and manages centrally. It can observe essentially every login attempt that happens through that browser. And critically, it can see the details of that login. What method was used, what kind of MFA, was it bypassed, was it downgraded? That's information that's often really hard or impossible to get just from logs from the IDP or the application itself, especially if you don't have deep API access.
It gives you much deeper real-time context about what's actually happening during a potential attack.
Exactly. What's fascinating here and really powerful is the ability to gather this rich, contextual information about the web page itself and how the user is interacting with it. This allows security tools operating in the browser to detect and stop risky situations in real time as they unfold.
Can you give an example, like for phishing?
Sure, the source uses the phishing page example. Browser-based security, like the push technology mentioned in the article, essentially sees everything happening on that page. It sees the page structure, how it looks, it knows where the user came from, did they click a suspicious link. It can see the password hash as it's entered without needing the raw password. It sees what scripts are running. And crucially, it sees where those entered credentials are being sent. Is it the legitimate site or some dodgy domain? Being right there in the browser provides just unrivaled visibility into that phishing activity and the user's behavior. You can catch right at the point of compromise.
Okay, that does sound like a powerful position to be in for defense.
Yeah.
So pulling this all together, what does this mean for us, for listeners navigating their digital work lives, and for the organizations trying to protect them?
Well, connecting it back to the big picture, identity attacks are, right now, probably the single biggest unsolved problem for most security teams. They are the leading cause of major breaches. That's the reality. But the encouraging part is that the browser, the very place these attacks happen, gives security teams the tools they need to fight back effectively, both proactively by using that visibility to find and fix those vulnerable ghost logins and misconfigurations before they're exploited, and reactively by detecting and blocking phishing attempts or session hijacking in real time, right as it happens to a user.
So it requires a shift in thinking, away from just firewalls and email filters.
Absolutely. Organizations really need to move beyond relying solely on the older methods, just checking MFA boxes, looking at basic identity dashboards, hoping legacy anti-phishing tools catch everything. They don't anymore. The core message from the source really rings true. If you want to stop modern identity attacks, there's simply no better place to do it than in the browser itself.
Okay, so for you, the listener, as you wrap your head around this, here's something to think about. Given that our everyday browser is now so central, it's the battleground, and potentially the best defense, how might our normal browsing habits, maybe even stuff we do outside of work on our personal devices, inadvertently play into this? And what small, subtle changes in how we navigate the web could actually make us, and by extension our organizations, significantly more resilient? Something to ponder.